terms of insurance fraud itself, just in terms of an opening remark, I'll say that it affects everyone. It doesn't just affect businesses. It impacts communities, it impacts entire neighborhoods, it impacts individual households and consumers, and we're at an inflection point. Technology is rapidly changing. It's creating new avenues for bad actors to commit fraud, and at the same time, new opportunities and tools for all of us to utilize to detect fraud and prosecute fraud. So for us, for this particular conference, this is an opportunity for us to engage with the public, to let people know about the dangers of insurance fraud, and hopefully to provide some strategies to avoid becoming a victim of insurance fraud or even becoming an unwitting participant in a fraudulent scheme. So we're hopeful that this discussion will resonate with you today.
Yeah, and Gaurav, that was such a great opening statement because it really outlines everything that I sort of want to get to in our conversation today. But I want to, before we get to each one of those, unpacking every single one of those points that I think are so important to talk about, I just wanted to talk about the basics of sort of why NYSIF is putting on a fraud awareness campaign, which is rooted in Insurance Law Section 409, for those of you who aren't aware. It is a requirement under New York State law for not just NYSIF, right, but all insurers in the state of New York to put on a fraud awareness campaign, because I think in the 90s when things were, things are better now, but we have to make sure they stay that way. But in the 90s when there was this recognition that there was such rampant fraud, that the public needed to be aware of how dangerous it really was. So, while insurance fraud can seem like a distant problem, you certainly, we heard your bio, you certainly have the background and experience to tell us, given your DFS experience and given your experience in the banking industry, but how widespread, in your opinion, is insurance fraud really?
One important point that's often missed is that it's more prevalent and pervasive than people actually recognize. And it adds billions of dollars to the cost of insurance. And in my mind, more importantly than that, it adds additional costs to pass through sums that are ultimately paid by people. So these are costs that the insurance industry may not really internalize, but rather pass on to consumers. That then affects the price of goods and services everywhere. And I think what's important in terms of tying this back to NYSIF, just by way of background, we're a 110-year-old organization. We are required to provide medical indemnity payments to injured workers. We cover roughly 2 million New Yorkers. It's difficult for us with insurance fraud. Insurance fraud is an actual impediment for NYSIF to accomplish its core mission. It adds cost, it hurts good businesses, and it's a drag on the economy. So when we think about our collective mission in rooting out insurance fraud, I think it's important also to remember that what we are trying to accomplish is a societal good, is a public good. So, and this is especially important for the students that might be in the audience, that as you're embarking on this journey, remember that the work that you're going to be doing is going to ultimately lead to a public good. It'll help reduce prices, and it'll actually help people and families. This is not something that is specific or internalized or insulated within the insurance industry. It's going to have a broader impact on the rest of society.
Yeah, and just to drive that point home further, insurance fraud costs, the Coalition Against Insurance Fraud did a study 2 years ago, and the number that they attached to insurance fraud was $308.6 billion, of which $34 billion alone was workers' compensation fraud, which is, it's just a really a shocking statistic, or a shocking figure. So with that, right, given the amount of money that is lost, I think it naturally, connects to public safety, as you pointed out already. So what do you think the broader implications, besides a real world impact that insurance fraud has with respect to the economy?
I think it's vast. Look, we're living in times of inflation where prices are already high, right? So insurance fraud adds to those costs. It increases prices and it exacerbates the problem. And when you think about it from a sort of a middle class point of view, people are already struggling. And this is an additional cost, often a hidden cost, that really hurts people. It stings them. And it's a point that's often forgotten. So again, collectively, the work that we're doing is designed to address, in part, that issue.
And how do you think that given the effect on the economy, what kind of relationship do you see that should exist between the insurance industry and law enforcement?
Yeah, I think collaboration is just really indispensable. I mean, we often talk about a lot of the successes that you've had at NYSIF and a lot of the successes you've had in your career. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say that those successes wouldn't have been possible without collaboration. So we work very closely with our law enforcement partners to identify trends, to investigate suspicious activity, to bring cases to court. And that commitment makes a really strong statement on deterrence. We hope that actually has an impact on people and has a deterrent effect. So that's extremely important. But I also will say that the work that we do in collaboration with our law enforcement partners isn't merely reactive, it's also very proactive. We work hand in glove on education. We share data, and we act in preemptive and engaging ways, much like we are today with this conference, to raise awareness of insurance fraud as a problem.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the collaboration was so key to us in the past year alone. We talk every month about the successes and achievements of DCI, which I've been fortunate to have a staff that continues to drive that mission forward. And last year alone, in 2023, we recovered $9 million in restitution, and that's a fraction, really, of what the actual losses were to NYSIF, and that doesn't even include the amount of money that we prevented from going out the door by not having to pay claims that shouldn't have existed in the first place. So people
it's hard to quantify that number, right?
Absolutely, and I know that to be true because I have to every year. So it is a challenge. And what would you say to somebody who thinks that insurance crime is a victimless crime? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's definitely not a victimless crime. That figure, the $9 million figure that you talked about, again, it's just internal to NYSIF. That's just us. Now imagine the potential recoveries across the insurance industry, across all lines of coverage. Imagine and think about the impact that would have on pricing, both insurance and non-insurance. And it brings into sharp relief the point that I made earlier about how important it is to detect fraud, how important it is to have investigators that are strong and savvy and analytically strong. Again, the students in the room should really take inspiration from that as they progress on their journey in this field.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think just to touch upon one thing you did mention, beyond the lines of business, NYSIF, we support 3 lines of business, and workers' comp being the largest. But there's other lines of business of insurance that actually can result in dangerous and terrible crimes. And one of those accidents actually was turned into law. Alice's Law, which involved a Queens Village grandmother who was struck and killed in a motor vehicle accident that was engineered by 3 individuals who were engaging in an insurance fraud crime. Like the lengths that people go to just to get eke money out of a system intended for people, right? Intended as a sort of safety net, right? And that's I think what makes you so passionate about making sure, in our board meetings, making sure that those checks are getting into people's hands, getting into their hands more quickly, because it really truly is an injured worker's lifeline when they're out of work.
I think that's exactly right. Again, our singular focus is to accomplish our mission. we have an obligation to injured workers. We need to pay their medical and their indemnity, and the fraud gets in the way. I will say, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, but when people think about insurance fraud, oftentimes they're thinking about claimant fraud. It's important to remember that in many instances, it's really employer-based fraud. And that becomes a big issue for us. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, claimant fraud, right? That's a much more linear sort of calculation, right? You have one person who, that's usually how I start my presentations at conferences, that it's usually an individual. You picture the person with the neck brace that walks out of the doctor's appointment, throws the neck brace and the cane into the trunk, and goes walk on their merry way to go to the gym or play golf or what have you. And those cases certainly do exist. But it really is, we've had infiltration of, not just misrepresentations by employers, which can be, an employer misrepresenting their payroll or misrepresenting what line of work they're engaging in, which I know that I see many of the prosecutors in the room shaking their heads, because the name of the game is to really, one, either eke money out of the system faster and in greater amounts, or it's for the employers to lower their pay or their premium, which in turn then burdens others because rates for everyone go up. And it's really infiltrated for many years now. Like the construction industry is a great example of that, because you have, there have been recent cases where you have across all lines, right? You have claimants involved with people who are coordinating between lawyers and coordinating between doctors, and it turns into a whole scheme of this common goal to simply eke money out of a system that once again is intended for the benefit of those who are down on their luck, who are injured and cannot go out and work for their families.
And that's why it's such a problem for NYSIF. And again, I'll hammer this point home over and over again. Focus on fraud is indeed a prerequisite for us to accomplish our core mission. And all of what you've said is sort of a reflection of that.
Yeah, and it's we wasting time trying to, and it is, if we had more confidence that there is a study that says there's about 10% of fraud across the board. Like if you talk about giant construction projects and things like that, that's generally the figure they'll attach to it. And we have to spend so much time and invest so many resources, which I'm grateful to have your support in doing, to try and find where those claims are and really distill which are the ones that are truly in need and which aren't, and that takes away from resources for other things.
Absolutely, and it also highlights the importance of technology that will help us do those things that you're referring to.
Absolutely. And so with that being said, you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks about how technology is obviously advanced, the way that we communicate, the fact that we're sitting in a room today and we don't have a live feed happening is actually quite unusual for today. But with that being said, the way that we interact with each other, with our colleagues, has changed dramatically. NYSIF has a claimant app now, right, which is new and different. So what is NYSIF doing from a fraud perspective? How are we trying to arm ourselves to sort of stay ahead of that curve?
Well, look, I think much of that is under your guidance. So I'm going to ask you to expand on whatever I say. I think from my point of view, a focus on technologies is extremely important. As I said before, technology is rapidly changing. Bad actors are utilizing that technology, whether it's cyber fraud or deep fakes or falsifying documents. These are new things that we're seeing, but at the same time, technology is also creating additional tools for all of us to be able to detect fraud, to root it out, and to prosecute it. I think that that's extremely important. I will say that the investigator of tomorrow is going to have to be as comfortable with technology as they are with more traditional forms and methods of investigation. And to, again, bring this home to the students, I think this is just a really exciting time with so many changes taking place. to become a part of this field, and the field is one where you can actually make a big difference.
Absolutely, and the one thing that I've always admired since joining NYSIF is that you've always leaned into the data. What can the data tell us? And we've done a lot of work trying to get our data into shape so that we can use it, use it for, completely exclusive of fraud, right? There are a lot of ways that data is useful in a business sense, but there's also opportunities for data for data analytics, for being able to distill patterns, of which, we've expanded our data analytics unit within DCI, which I'm grateful for. And truly, your comment to the students is so well taken, because we have hybrid positions in DCI where we have auditors who we also want to make investigators, right? You need those two skills together. Certainly the skills of the street police officer are not lost. That is for sure. And I've said that at conferences where we're talking about AI and how frightening that can be, there's still those skills we still lean into heavily, because you still have to see it with your own eyes and get the evidence so that you can present it to a DA so that it's usable and it's not hearsay. But with that being said, I think having both those skills is so important, and I also think with the advance of technology, there's opportunities, right? There's, just like you said, we're pivoting, we're exploring other ways that we can do surveillance. Can we do unmanned surveillance? Of course, after we talk to the OGC, Office of General Counsel, can we do unmanned surveillance? Can we do can we think of other ways that we can get information? Just sitting through, I've sat through past panels where there's so much that social media can tell you. And as much as social media can be a tool for fraudsters, for them to hide, it can also be so tremendous for us to be able to see what they're doing, like the guy who is going to play golf after he goes to his chiropractor for his 20th 20th appointment of the month, because he says he can't move, but he's really self-restricting his own motions. How do you view students? How do you think that they could be most impactful? Like, what do you think the important message is for them to take away?
Yeah, look, we need in the next generation people with a fresh perspective. We need people with strong analytical skills, and we need people with and most importantly, strong ethical foundation. And I think those are really important things. Being curious, being dedicated to what you're doing, working in good faith. As long as you're adhering to those values, I think you're going to have a great career in the field. That matters a lot.
And what would you say? I know we've talked a lot about the criminal aspect, or pursuing cases criminally, right? But is that all we do at NYSIF?
Again, a question from me to you. That is not what we do at NYSIF. Now, you can expand on that, but I will say, look, it's very important that we keep our focus on what we're doing. There are lots of layers of investigation and vigilance that we have to undertake in order to do a good job here. Not everything ultimately results in a prosecution. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before a case goes to prosecution. And in many instances, in fact, most instances, it won't be in a criminal realm. So there's a lot of work, a lot of data tools, analytical tools that are utilized, and good old-fashioned investigative work that's utilized in order to be able to spot suspicious activity, fraudulent activity, potentially fraudulent activity that could lead to on the one hand, preventing a fraud from occurring, but on the other hand, being able to make the system whole.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to sort of drive home the point that maybe for the students, because I'm pretty certain that the prosecutors in the room know this already, because you're the ones who probably say no to us. Maybe not all of you, but there's standards, right? And there's a higher standard when it comes to criminal law versus civil law. And a lot of what we do is working with the Workers' Comp Board, who's here today, right? And that's a large part of what we do at DCI is managing sort of along the lines of, we're an insurance company, right? So managing risks and making sure that people are paying their fair share. And more often than not, thankfully, it's not the people who are staging an accident that kill a grandmother. More often than not, it's people misunderstanding the application, or perhaps there's somebody, and honestly, a lot of policyholders that, if you're a small construction company and you have to fill out, there's a lot of paperwork.
There's a lot of forms.
There's a lot of forms in insurance. So, helping them understand, which I think NYSIF does a really good job of. But, I think it's the headlines you'll see, but the headlines you won't see is all the work that we do to just, make sure that NYSIF continues to be in a position to offer those competitive prices, to be the insurer of last resort, to be that safety net for employers as well, to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share, even if they're doing it intentionally or mistakenly, and even if sometimes they are doing it intentionally, we can fix that too before it gets to a point where there's no turning back. But I think it's important to sort of make that point that it's not just the criminal $9 million that we celebrate. It's those smaller sort of victories, whether it be going before the workers' comp board to stop payment on claims that shouldn't be paid any longer. That those small victories do really amount to making sure the system as a whole functions and allows us to continue to be the best NYSIF we can be.
Absolutely, and it's those small victories that when taken in totality make a difference. And I would say, and you may disagree with this or you may confirm this, but most of the work that we do within DCI is really in support of a lot of the smaller things that amount to a big victory at the end of the day, versus those big cases that might see a splash in the media, or might require partnership with law enforcement that ultimately leads to a trial. It's the smaller things, the behind the scenes things that ultimately drive a lot of the work that we do. And at the end of the day, that work is very, very beneficial, as I said, for society, often forgotten that it's a benefit to society. That's why it's important to remember that as you do your jobs every day, or as you start your job in the future, that you are actually making a big difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. I think we said, but 70 or 80% of our cases are non-criminal, and that's a good thing. Because if that turns on its head, we have some real problems. I think you'll agree, from an economic standpoint, from a moral standpoint, from a lot of standpoints. But try just sort of bringing this to a close. What advice would you have for a student sitting in this room who have been listening to our conversation about insurance fraud, and just like the importance and also the opportunities therein?
I will quote you in saying that integrity is really the most powerful tool that you have, and as long as you do your job with a strong ethical foundation, you're curious, you dedicate yourself to the mission, I think you'll be all right. You'll do a lot of good things in a field that can be really rewarding.
Thank you.